My name is Eleanor, and I'm 63 years old, a retired nurse who thought peace had finally come after decades of work and sacrifice. After spending nearly 40 years working long, exhausting shifts at Mary's Hospital, I thought retirement would finally bring me the quiet life I'd earned. I'd spent my youth taking care of others, patients, my husband, and my son, and when I finally stepped out of those hospital doors for the last time, I felt like I could finally breathe. I moved into a cozy cottage on the edge of a small town in Oregon, surrounded by a garden I'd always dreamed of keeping. My days became beautifully predictable, watering flowers in the morning, walking to the local cafe for coffee, and reading mystery novels by the window when it rained. Leonard, my husband, had passed away 5 years earlier. We had a long, steady marriage, not perfect, but full of quiet love and shared endurance. Losing him had been the hardest thing I'd ever faced. For a while, it felt like my life had ended with his. But time, as it does, softened the pain. I learned to live alone. I learned to cook for one. I learned that silence didn't always have to feel like loneliness. And then there was Dylan, my only son. He was 35, ambitious and sharp-minded, the kind of boy who could charm his way through anything. As a child, he was gentle and curious, always building things, asking questions, eager to please. I remember how proud I was when he got his first job in the city. He wanted to make something of himself, and I wanted nothing more than for him to have the kind of success I never could. But somewhere along the way, we drifted apart. The phone calls became fewer. The visits stopped altogether. He always seemed busy, working late, traveling for business, too tired to talk. I told myself that was normal. Children grow up and chase their own lives. I'd done my job. I'd raised him well, or so I thought. When I began receiving my pension, I finally felt some sense of stability. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to live comfortably. I planned to use a bit of it to travel, nothing fancy, maybe a trip to see the autumn leaves in Vermont or a small cruise along the coast. The rest, I wanted to save for the years ahead. I felt secure for the first time in decades. Every Sunday, I met my friend June at the cafe for breakfast. She used to tease me, saying I finally looked content, like a woman who'd figured out life's rhythm. I suppose I had. My home was filled with little reminders of peace, the smell of lavender candles, soft jazz playing in the background, sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor in the mornings. After years of chaos, the quiet felt like heaven. Still, there were moments I missed Dylan more than I liked to admit. Sometimes, when I'd see a mother and son walking together in town, I'd feel that familiar ache in my chest. I'd wonder what he was doing, if he ever thought about me, or if the city had swallowed him whole. I'd send him texts occasionally, short and sweet, "Hope you're doing okay, love you, don't forget to eat something healthy." The replies, when they came, were always brief. "Thanks, Mom. Busy week. Talk soon." I clung to those two-word replies like they were gold. Looking back now, maybe that was my mistake. Mistaking distance for independence. I didn't see the warning signs. I didn't notice how cold his tone had become, how detached he sounded. I assumed he was fine, that he didn't need his mother anymore. But I was wrong. One rainy afternoon, as I sat by the window sipping tea, my phone rang. The screen lit up with Dylan's name. I smiled instantly, my heart warming the way it always did when he called. I hadn't heard from him in months. I picked up eagerly, ready to hear his voice. "Hi, Mom," he said. His tone was polite but flat, almost rehearsed. "Dylan, it's so good to hear from you. How have you been?" I asked. "Busy," he replied shortly. Then, there was a pause, an awkward silence that stretched longer than it should have. "Actually, I was thinking about coming to visit. Maybe stay for a few days." My smile widened. "Oh, that would be wonderful. It's been so long. You can have your old room. I'll make your favorite dinner, roast chicken with rosemary." He hesitated for a moment before saying, "Yeah, sounds good. I'll come this weekend." When the call ended, I felt a flutter of excitement I hadn't felt in years. I ran my fingers over the picture of him on the mantel, his graduation photo, his confident smile. My son was coming home. That night, I made a list of everything I wanted to prepare. Clean the guest room, stock up on groceries, maybe even bake a pie. I told June the next morning and she laughed, saying I sounded like a mother sending her boy off to college again. I didn't tell her how nervous I felt. Something about his tone had unsettled me, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was just the years apart, I told myself. Maybe he'd grown into someone I didn't fully know anymore. Still, I was determined to make the visit special, to remind him of home, of warmth, of the mother who still loved him fiercely. I couldn't have known then that his visit wouldn't bring us closer. It would shatter everything I thought I knew about my son and about myself. But one phone call from him changed everything. I hadn't seen Dylan in almost 2 years when he called saying he wanted to visit for a few days. The morning of his arrival, I woke up earlier than usual. My heart fluttered with the kind of nervous energy that only a mother can understand. I wanted everything to be perfect the way it used to be when he was little. I baked his favorite banana bread, washed his old bed sheets, and even set out a small vase of fresh daisies on his nightstand. The house smelled like cinnamon and coffee by the time noon rolled around. When Dylan's car finally pulled into the driveway, I felt a lump rise in my throat. He looked different, thinner, sharper around the edges somehow. His once bright blue eyes seemed dulled, tired. I waved eagerly, forcing a smile that came naturally to me, but his return smile felt stiff, practiced. "Mom," he said flatly, stepping out and giving me a quick hug that lasted barely a second. I tried not to let it bother me. "You must be exhausted from the drive. Come in. I made your favorite." He walked past me into the house, glancing around like he was taking inventory of every detail, the furniture, the decor, even the mail pile on the counter. He nodded once. "Place looks nice." That was it. No warmth, no comment about how it felt good to be home. I pushed aside the sting of disappointment and guided him to the kitchen table, where the roast chicken was still steaming. We ate mostly in silence at first. I tried to fill the gaps with stories: how my garden had finally started attracting hummingbirds, how June had tripped during yoga and made the whole class laugh. Dylan smiled politely but didn't ask questions. He picked at his food more than he ate it. "Are you sure everything's okay, honey?" I finally asked. "You look tired." He sighed, setting down his fork. "Just work stuff. A lot's been going on." "What kind of work are you doing now? You mentioned a new business last time we talked." He nodded, eyes darting briefly toward me. "Yeah, it's going well. Still early stages. Tech investments, mostly." There was something about the way he said it, too rehearsed, too vague, that made me uneasy. But I didn't press. I'd learned long ago that pressing Dylan only pushed him further away. After dinner, he pulled out his phone and started scrolling, completely absorbed. I busied myself with dishes, trying not to feel invisible in my own kitchen. The silence between us felt heavier than it used to. Finally, he spoke. "Mom, you've been getting your pension for a few months now, right?" I froze. "Yes," I said carefully, drying my hands on a towel. "Why?" He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Just curious. I was thinking maybe we could do something together. Like, invest in something long-term. You'd make more money that way." I smiled faintly, relieved it wasn't something worse. "Oh, Dylan, I think I'm too old to start playing with investments. I'm happy with what I have. I just want peace and stability." He looked up then, his gaze sharp. "Peace doesn't pay bills, Mom. Money should work for you, not sit in some low-interest account." His tone was almost lecturing. I didn't like it, but I stayed calm. "Sweetheart, I worked for that money my whole life. It's not about growing it anymore, it's about enjoying it." He smirked faintly, shaking his head. "You've always played it too safe. That's why Dad had to handle everything financial. Remember?" That jab stung. Leonard had always been the one to handle the bills, yes. But that was because I was working night shifts, not because I was incapable. The implication that I was naive or helpless hit deeper than he realized. I didn't argue. I just said softly, "Well, I'm happy with what I have." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "I'm just saying, Mom, you've got money sitting there doing nothing. I could turn that into something big. You trust me, don't you?" His words were casual, But there was a subtle pressure behind them, like a hand, gently, but insistently, on my shoulder. I do trust you, I said slowly. But I don't think I'm comfortable investing my pension. I work too hard for that. Something in his expression shifted. His smile faded completely. The air grew heavier. Right, he said flatly. Of course, you'd rather let it rot in a savings account than help your own son. The bitterness in his tone startled me. That's not fair, Dylan. I didn't say that. He stood abruptly, pushing back his chair. Forget it. I shouldn't have asked. He walked to the living room, grabbing his phone again. I stood there in silence, unsure what to say. For the first time, I realized I didn't recognize the man in front of me. Later that night, as he sat on the couch scrolling through messages, I tried one more time to reach him. Dylan, I'm really glad you're here, I said gently. It's been too long. He looked up briefly, his face blank. Yeah, good to see you too, Mom. Then his phone buzzed, and his attention was gone again. I went to bed with a strange heaviness in my chest, that kind of ache that comes from sensing something isn't right but not knowing how to name it. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had happened to my sweet boy, the one who used to leave me hand-drawn Mother's Day cards and call me his favorite nurse. Something was off. I didn't know what, but deep down, I could feel it building, a storm waiting on the horizon. That night, he said something that made my heart stop. You'll hand over half your pension, he said flatly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It was the next morning, gray and quiet, with rain tapping against the windows. I was in the kitchen pouring coffee when Dylan walked in, his face unreadable. He didn't say good morning, didn't smile, just sat down at the table and started tapping his fingers against the wood. Something in his energy felt off. Coffee? I asked, trying to sound cheerful. He nodded, eyes still distant. I set a mug in front of him, and after a long pause, he said, Mom, I've been thinking about what we talked about last night. Oh? I replied cautiously. About investing? Yeah, he said, leaning forward, elbows on the first table. I need to be straight with you. My business is in trouble right now, but it's temporary. I've got a solid plan, a guaranteed return. I just need a little push to keep things moving. I hesitated. How much of a push are we talking about? He looked me dead in the eye and said it without hesitation. Half your pension. I froze, thinking I'd misheard. Excuse me? You heard me, he said, his tone calm, almost clinical. Half. It's not a big deal, Mom. You don't even spend most of it. You live alone. You don't need that much money sitting around when it could actually make a difference. For a moment, I couldn't even find words. Dylan, that's not how this works. That money is for my future, for bills, medical costs, emergencies. He interrupted sharply. You've got a paid-off house. You're fine. You're set for life. I'm the one trying to build something. This is your chance to help me. I blinked, utterly stunned. Dylan, I already raised you. I supported you through college. Through every decision you made. I'm proud of that. But I can't just hand over half of everything I've worked for. He leaned back, his jaw tightening. You don't get it. This isn't about generosity. It's about family. Parents help their kids. You owe me that much after everything I've done for you. His words hit me like a slap. Owe you? I repeated quietly. Dylan, I don't owe you my life savings. That money represents 40 years of hard work, night shifts, holidays spent at the hospital, missed birthdays. He shrugged, almost mockingly. So what? You can't take it with you, Mom. The coldness in his tone sent a chill through me. I tried to reason with him, hoping some part of the boy I'd raised was still in there. Dylan, I understand you're under pressure, but this isn't the way. Let's sit down, talk to a financial advisor, figure out a solution. He stood, abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't need advice, I need money. He snapped. I can't believe you'd be this selfish. I'm your son, for God's sake. My voice trembled, but I didn't back down. And I'm your mother. I've already given you everything I could. I love you, but love doesn't mean I have to destroy myself for you. He glared at me, his expression hardening into something I didn't recognize. "You've always been like this," he said bitterly. "Always holding back, always acting like you know best. Dad told me how stubborn you could be." That one stung. "Don't bring your father into this," I said firmly. "He'd never approve of this conversation," he scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, well, Dad's not here anymore, is he? Maybe if you'd listened to him more, things would have been different." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of the rain filled the room. Then, in a softer but more dangerous tone, he said, "You're going to think about it, right? You'll realize it's the right thing to do." I swallowed hard, forcing calm into my voice. "I'll think about what's best for both of us." He nodded once, but his eyes told me he didn't believe me. He thought I would cave. Maybe he was used to getting his way with charm, with pressure, with guilt. When he left the kitchen, I stood there gripping the counter, trying to steady my breathing. The coffee had gone cold. My hands were shaking. I felt a kind of heartbreak I'd never experienced before, something beyond disappointment. It was the realization that my own child saw me as a bank, not a mother. That night, I sat alone in my living room, staring at old photo albums. Dylan's childhood face smiled up at me from birthday parties, family picnics, first days of school. What happened to that little boy? When did money replace love? I replayed the conversation over and over in my mind, searching for where I'd gone wrong. Maybe I'd been too soft, too forgiving all these years. Maybe, without meaning to, I'd taught him that I'd always be there to clean up his messes. But as I looked at his pictures, one truth settled deep inside me, something I couldn't ignore anymore. If I gave in now, I'd lose more than my pension. I'd lose myself. So I made a quiet promise that night. I would find out what was really going on with him, what had turned my son into this stranger in my home. I owed myself that much. By morning, I decided to find out what was really going on. I needed to know why my own son would turn against me over money. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dylan's face, cold, calculating, and desperate. The boy who once brought me wildflowers from the backyard had turned into a man who could look me in the eye and demand half my pension without an ounce of shame. I kept asking myself why. What had happened to him? Was this really about business, or was there something darker beneath it? When morning came, I brewed coffee and sat at the table, staring out the window as the fog lifted off the garden. My heart ached, but somewhere beneath that ache, determination began to grow. I needed answers. The first person I thought to call was someone who might still know Dylan's world better than I did his old friend, Marcus. They'd grown up together, inseparable in their teenage years, though they'd drifted apart when Dylan moved to the city. I still had Marcus's number saved from years ago, back when he'd call the house to ask if Dylan could come outside and play basketball. When I called, he sounded surprised to hear from me. "Mrs. Carter? Wow, it's been forever. How are you?" "I'm all right," I said, though my voice betrayed a tremor. "Marcus, I was wondering if you've heard from Dylan lately." There was a pause. "Yeah, a few months back." "Why? Everything okay?" I hesitated. "Not exactly. He's been acting different. He asked me for money, a lot of money, said it was for a business deal." Marcus sighed deeply. I was afraid of that. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He spoke slowly, like someone choosing his words carefully. "Mrs. Carter, Dylan's not doing as well as he says he is. That business he's always talking about, it's not what people think. He's been trying to start a company for years, but it's gone bad. He owes people money. A lot of it." I felt my heart skip. "Owes who?" "I don't know all the details," Marcus continued, "but I heard he took out some personal loans, some from banks, some from not-so-official sources. He's been juggling debts, trying to make quick money in crypto, startups, whatever's trending. It's a mess." I sat there in silence, gripping the phone. The image of Dylan, the confident, successful businessman, shattered like glass. Marcus's voice softened. "I didn't want to get involved, but I think he's desperate, Mrs. Carter. He's not thinking straight." "Thank you," I whispered. "You've helped more than you know." When I hung up, I just sat there, staring at the floor. So that was it. My son wasn't ambitious, he was drowning. And instead of asking for help, he'd decided to drag me down with him. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to storm upstairs, wake him up, and demand an explanation. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed to understand how far he was willing to go. That day, I acted as if nothing had changed. I made breakfast, humming softly as I set the table. Dylan came down late, bleary-eyed, scrolling through his phone. "Morning," I said warmly. "Morning," he muttered, sitting down. He barely touched his food. His phone buzzed every few minutes, and each time it did, I noticed his jaw tighten. He'd glance at the screen, then quickly turn it face down. "Everything all right?" I asked gently. He forced a smile. "Yeah, just business. You know how it is." I nodded, pretending to believe him. But inside I was observing everything: the restless tapping of his fingers, the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted toward the window as if expecting someone to appear. When he stepped outside to take a call, I overheard his voice through the slightly open window. His tone was hushed but tense. "I told you, I'm working on it." "No. I'll have it soon. Just give me another week." I froze. His words were sharp, urgent, and terrified. When he came back inside, I acted normal, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I knew then that this wasn't just a son asking for help. This was a man cornered by his own mistakes. Over the next few days, I played the part of the naive mother. I asked gentle questions, offered comfort, and watched his reactions carefully. Every time I mentioned money or the word loan, his entire demeanor changed: defensive, snappy, agitated. At night, I'd hear him pacing in his room, whispering on his phone. I could make out bits and pieces: words like deadline, transfer, and "they're not patient." It was becoming clear that he wasn't just broke, he was scared. And scared people make dangerous choices. One evening, I decided to confront him indirectly. We were sitting in the living room, the TV flickering softly in the background. "Dylan," I said, "you know you can tell me anything, right? If you're in some kind of trouble." He immediately cut me off. "I'm fine, Mom. Drop it." His tone was sharp enough to silence me. But the way his hands trembled gave him away. I nodded slowly. "Okay. I just wanted you to know I'm here if you need help." He stood up abruptly. "Help? You mean money? That's all you ever think I need?" I blinked in disbelief. "You're the one who asked." He didn't let me finish. "Forget it." He stormed upstairs, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. I sat there, staring at the dark TV screen, feeling like I was watching a stranger live inside my son's body. I wanted to believe he was still in there somewhere, the kind, warm boy I'd raised, but every action, every word, said otherwise. The truth was out now. I knew he was lying, manipulating, desperate. But I hadn't yet realized just how far he was willing to go. I thought the worst had passed, that he'd calm down once he saw I wouldn't give in. But I was wrong. Because that very night, I caught him doing something that shattered the last bit of trust I had left. Then he crossed a line that changed everything. I caught him in my study, going through my financial papers. It was late past midnight and the house was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock in the hallway. I couldn't sleep again. My thoughts had become a constant loop of worry, doubt, and disbelief. I kept replaying the look on Dylan's face every time he brought up money, the way his eyes hardened when I said no. Something deep inside me whispered that I needed to be careful. I decided to go downstairs for a glass of water, and as I reached the bottom step, I noticed something strange. A faint light was coming from under the door of my study, the room where I kept all my important documents. I hadn't been in there since earlier that week. My stomach tightened. Quietly, I walked closer. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I saw him, Dylan, sitting at my desk drawer open, papers scattered across the surface. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My son, my own flesh and blood, was rifling through my private financial documents. I heard the rustle of envelopes, the unmistakable click of my laptop opening. "Dylan," I said finally, my voice trembling. He jerked up like a guilty child caught stealing cookies, but the look on his face wasn't guilt, it was irritation. "Mom?" he said sharply. "You scared me." "What are you doing?" I asked quietly. He stood quickly, as if trying to block my view of the desk. "Nothing. I was just checking something for you. Making sure your accounts are secure. You've got your pension paperwork just sitting here, it's not safe." I took a step closer. "You're lying," I said softly. "Those files are locked for a reason. You went through my desk." His jaw clenched. "You don't trust me?" "I trusted you enough to let you stay here," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "And now I find you going through my personal papers in the middle of the night?" He sighed loudly, rubbing his forehead. "You're overreacting. I was trying to help you. You wouldn't listen when I told you your money wasn't being used wisely. I'm just trying to protect your future." I stared at him in disbelief. "Protect me? By sneaking around my home and invading my privacy?" He slammed the drawer shut so hard that the sound echoed through the room. "You don't get it, do you? You're sitting on more money than you'll ever use while I'm drowning out there. You could change my life, Mom. But no, you'd rather watch me struggle." I felt tears sting my eyes. "Dylan, you are not a child anymore. You made your choices. I've supported you every step of the way. But this isn't support. This is theft." His face twisted with anger. "Theft? Don't talk to me like I'm some criminal. You think I'm the bad guy because I asked for what's rightfully mine? What's rightfully yours?" I repeated in disbelief. "Dylan, that money is mine. Your father and I worked our whole lives for it. You weren't entitled to a cent of it." The words hung heavy in the air. For a moment, I thought he might hit something or someone. His breathing was harsh, his hands trembling at his sides. Then, without another word, he brushed past me, muttering, "You'll regret this." He grabbed his coat from the hallway and slammed the front door behind him, leaving me standing in the middle of the study, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked over to the desk, staring at the mess he'd left behind. My pension documents, my will, my bank statements all scattered, exposed. My laptop was still open on the screen where he'd tried to access my accounts. I quickly closed it, locked it, and sat down, shaking from head to toe. It was in that moment I realized something painful but necessary. My son could no longer be trusted. Whatever love or loyalty I felt for him had to come second to protecting myself. The next morning, I called my attorney, Mr. Hayward. He'd helped Leonard and me with our estate planning years ago and was someone I trusted completely. When I told him what had happened, his tone shifted from gentle concern to firm resolve. "Eleanor, you need to protect yourself immediately," he said. "I've seen this before. When money mixes with desperation, even good people make terrible choices." "I don't want to believe he'd actually steal from me," I whispered. "Then don't," he said calmly. "But take precautions anyway." Together, we came up with a plan, securing my accounts with new passwords, locking important papers in a safe, and setting up alerts on all my bank transactions. He also suggested that I document what had happened just in case things got worse. When I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone, feeling numb. This was not how I'd imagined my golden years. I'd thought retirement would bring peace, not paranoia. That evening, Dylan came back as if nothing had happened. He acted casual, almost cheerful, greeting me with a forced smile. "Hey, Mom," he said, as though the night before hadn't happened. I played along. "Dinner's in the oven." He nodded and sat down, scrolling through his phone. I could feel the tension thick in the air, like two strangers, sharing a house out of habit rather than love. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see my son. I saw someone who had made a choice that had broken something between us that could never fully be mended. Still, I told myself I'd stay calm. I'd protect what was mine, quietly and carefully. But as I would soon learn, the situation wasn't just about stolen papers or financial desperation. Dylan wasn't done pushing. He wanted more. And the next time, he wouldn't come for me in private. He'd come for me in public. But I wasn't prepared for how far Dylan would go next. He didn't just want my money, he wanted everyone to believe I was cruel. For the next few days, Dylan's behavior grew colder, stranger. He stopped talking to me unless it was about money. I tried to act normal, tried to reach the son I once knew, but it felt like every word between us now was part of a negotiation. He was distant but calculating, always on his phone, always pacing the house like he was waiting for something or someone. One morning, he came into the kitchen dressed sharply, wearing a blazer and freshly polished shoes. "Mom," he said suddenly, "Laura and I are coming to lunch with you today." I blinked. "Laura?" "Yeah, my girlfriend," he said casually, sipping his coffee like it was nothing. "We've been seeing each other for a few months. I told her about you. That caught me off guard. I hadn't even known he was dating anyone. But the mention of a girlfriend gave me a flicker of hope. Maybe she'd be good for him, calm him down, talk sense into him. So I agreed. "Of course. That sounds lovely." We met later that afternoon at the local restaurant I usually went to with my friend June. A small, cozy place where everyone knew everyone. When I walked in and saw Dylan standing by the table with a tall brunette beside him, I smiled warmly and reached out my hand. "You must be Laura," I said kindly. She smiled nervously and shook my hand. "It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Carter. Dylan's told me so much about you." "Oh, I hope good things," I said with a little laugh. She smiled again, but there was something uneasy in her eyes, something that hinted she already knew this wouldn't be a comfortable lunch. We ordered our food, and for a little while, things seemed almost normal. We talked about small things, her work at a marketing firm, how long they'd been dating, what life in the city was like. But then, as the waitress walked away after bringing our drinks, Dylan leaned back in his chair and said, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear, "So, Mom, have you decided if you're finally going to help me out or not?" The question hit me like a slap. "Dylan," I said quietly, "this isn't the place." "Why not?" he interrupted, his voice rising just enough to turn a few heads. "It's not like it's a secret. My own mother refuses to help her son when he's in trouble." "Dylan, please," I whispered, glancing around. People were starting to look. Laura's face turned red. "Dylan, maybe we should talk about this later," she said softly, reaching for his arm. But he pulled it away. "No, Laura, let's be honest here. My mom's sitting on a pile of money she doesn't even use, and she can't spare a dime for her only child. Does that sound fair to you?" I felt the air leave my lungs. "That's not true," I said, my voice trembling. "You know that's not true." "Oh, come on, Mom," he sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You worked your whole life, and now you just hoard it while your son, your flesh and blood, is struggling. What kind of parent does that?" Every eye in the restaurant seemed to turn toward us. The whispering began. My face burned. I wanted to disappear. "Dylan," I said firmly, trying to regain control, "you're embarrassing yourself. This isn't about love or family, it's about you trying to manipulate me." He laughed bitterly. "Manipulate you? Wow, that's rich coming from you. You've been controlling me my whole life." The words cut deeper than he knew. I'd given him everything, my time, my money, my health, my heart, and somehow, he'd twisted it into control. Laura stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'm sorry," she said to me quietly. "I didn't know he was going to do this." "Laura, sit down," Dylan snapped. But she shook her head. "No, Dylan, this isn't right. She wouldn't even have what she has if it weren't for me pushing her to retire early." That was the final straw. I stood up slowly, the entire restaurant falling silent. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out steady. "Enough, Dylan. I will not let you disrespect me in public or twist this into something it isn't." He laughed bitterly again. "You're unbelievable." "No," I said softly. "I'm just done being bullied by my own son." And with that, I picked up my purse and walked out. The whispers followed me. But I didn't look back. Outside, the sunlight felt harsh and blinding. I stood there on the sidewalk, shaking, my heart aching with a mixture of shame, anger, and grief. My hands trembled as I tried to catch my breath. For the first time in my life, I realized Dylan didn't just want money, he wanted power. He wanted to control the narrative, make me look small so he could feel big. When I got home, I sat on the couch for hours in silence. The humiliation of that public scene burned deep. But underneath the pain, something was changing inside me. I was done being quiet. Done letting him guilt me, manipulate me, and make me question my worth. That evening, I called Mr. Hayward again. I want to move forward, I told him. Lock everything down. I don't want Dylan to have any access now or in the future. His tone was calm but approving. That's the right decision, Eleanor. By the time I hung up, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing. Because if Dylan wanted a battle, I was finally ready to fight one. The following week, I made a shocking announcement. If he wanted to use the law against me, I'd use it to protect myself. The morning after that humiliating lunch, I sat at my kitchen table with a pen and a notepad, staring at a blank page. Every ounce of maternal instinct inside me had been crushed by the realization that my son wasn't going to stop, not with guilt, not with reason, not even with public shame. I'd spent years believing that love could fix everything, that if I just stayed patient, stayed kind, he would eventually come around. But now, it was time to face the truth. Dylan wasn't asking for help anymore. He was hunting for control. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Hayward again. I'm ready to take your advice, I told him. Let's make sure I'm protected, permanently. His voice on the other end was steady and reassuring. Good. I'll come by this afternoon with the documents. We'll handle everything quietly. That day, I learned more about legal safeguards than I ever thought I'd need to know. Mr. Hayward explained how to set up a living trust in my name, one that would secure my pension and savings, keeping them out of reach of anyone who might try to manipulate me. We updated my will, explicitly excluding Dylan until he could demonstrate financial stability and moral responsibility. It hurt to even sign the papers. My hands trembled as I wrote my name on the dotted lines. I never imagined I'd have to protect myself from my own son, I said softly. Mr. Hayward gave me a sympathetic look. Eleanor, this isn't punishment, it's protection. You're doing what any rational person would do. You're simply drawing a line. I nodded, though my heart ached. Drawing a line between yourself and your own child isn't something that feels rational, it feels like grief. After he left, I made copies of all the documents and placed them in a small safe in my closet. I even installed a security system in the house, something I'd never thought I'd need. I told June, my closest friend, everything. She was furious on my behalf. You've done nothing wrong, Eleanor, she said. Don't let guilt eat you alive. He's a grown man making grown choices. Her words helped steady me. That week, I went about my routine as normally as possible, watering the garden, attending my book club, volunteering at the senior center, but beneath the calm surface, I was bracing myself. Because I knew Dylan wouldn't just disappear, he always came back when he didn't get his way. Sure enough, 4 days later, I heard the knock. It wasn't tentative or polite, it was loud, impatient. I opened the door, and there he was, standing on my porch with fury in his eyes. Mom, he said coldly. We need to talk. I think we've said enough, I replied, keeping my voice calm. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. I talked to Laura, he began, pacing the living room. She told me you've been spreading lies about me, telling people I'm unstable, that I'm stealing from you. I folded my arms. I haven't lied, Dylan. I've told the truth. You've tried to take money that isn't yours. You've disrespected me in public. What do you expect people to think? His face flushed with anger. You think you can just ruin my reputation like that? You think I won't fight back? I met his gaze. If you're referring to money, there's nothing left for you to take. I've secured my finances. Everything's in a trust now. Even if I wanted to give you money, I couldn't. The shock on his face was instant, followed by rage. You did what? I protected myself, I said simply. It's done, Dylan. He clenched his fists, his voice shaking with barely contained fury. You had no right. I'm your son. That money is as much mine as it is yours. No, I said quietly. It isn't. You didn't earn it. You didn't sacrifice for it. Your father and I did. And after the way you've treated me, I couldn't trust you with a single dollar. For a moment, his mask cracked. I saw panic flicker behind his eyes, the fear of a man watching his last lifeline slip away. Then the anger took over again. You'll regret this, he hissed. You think this is over? I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of mother you really are. I stood tall, forcing strength into my voice even though my hands were trembling. You already did that, Dylan. At the restaurant. In front of strangers. But this time, I'm not going to stay quiet. He stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to intimidate me into backing down. But when I didn't flinch, he turned abruptly and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. When the echo faded, I sank into the armchair, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. It was the kind of grief that doesn't come with sobs, just silent, steady heartbreak. I'd done what I needed to do, but the cost was unbearable. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely lighter. Empty, yes, but lighter. The fear that had haunted me for weeks had been replaced by resolve. Dylan could threaten. He could rage. He could call me every name under the sun, but he could no longer control me. I spent that day cleaning, rearranging, reclaiming my space. I even put away some of the old photos of him, not to forget him, but to give myself permission to stop clinging to the boy he once was. For the first time in a long time, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw not a weak, aging woman but a survivor. A mother who had finally chosen herself. That's when I decided I wouldn't be afraid anymore. For the first time in my life, I stood up to my son without hesitation. A few days passed after Dylan's outburst, and though I tried to keep my life steady, I couldn't shake the tension that hung in the air. I half expected another knock on the door, another confrontation. Each night, I double-checked the locks and kept my phone close by, just in case. But for a while, there was nothing. Silence. It was both a relief and a warning. Then, one afternoon, the silence broke. I was watering the flowers in my front yard when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Dylan's car pulled into the driveway fast. Too fast. He stepped out wearing the same blazer he'd worn to lunch that day, but this time, his expression wasn't angry, it was desperate. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling slightly as he shoved them into his pockets. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked, his voice tight. I hesitated. Every instinct in me wanted to say no. But there was a flicker of hope in me still. The stubborn, motherly part that wanted to believe maybe, just maybe, he was here to make things right. "All right," I said softly, motioning toward the porch. "Come in." We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where all of this had started weeks ago. I folded my hands, waiting. He ran his fingers through his hair. "Mom. Look. I know things got out of hand. I said things I shouldn't have. But you've got to understand. I'm in deep trouble. These people I owe money to, they're not patient. I don't have time." My stomach sank. "So you were lying about the business." He looked down. "It started as a business," he muttered. "Then it turned into other things, investments, loans, favors. I kept thinking I could turn it around. I just need one break. And you thought that break was me," I said quietly. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said everything. "Dylan," I began carefully, "I love you. I always will. But I can't give you money. Not now. Not like this." His head snapped up. "You can't? Or you won't?" "I won't," I said firmly. "Because if I do, it won't save you, it'll destroy us both." He stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen. "You don't understand. These people, they'll come after me." "Then go to the police," I said. He turned on me, furious. "You really think that's an option? You think the police care about some guy who owes the wrong people money? Then get help," I said, standing too. "Real help. Financial counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. But you're not taking my life savings to fix your mistakes." He slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the house. "You're unbelievable. You're my mother. You're supposed to help me." My voice rose, stronger than I thought it could. And I have helped you your whole life. I gave you every chance, every ounce of love I had to give. But you can't keep taking and calling it love. He froze. I think my tone startled him. I'd never yelled at him before. Not once. For 35 years I had been gentle, patient, understanding. But this time my patience had run dry. Mom, he said softly, almost mocking now. You're really gonna do this? You'd rather see your son hurt than part with some money you don't even need? I took a slow, steady breath. I'd rather see my son hit rock bottom and learn to stand up again than watch him destroy himself while pulling me down with him. He shook his head, laughing bitterly. You think you're strong now? You think this makes you a hero? No, I said. It makes me a mother who finally learned the difference between love and enablement. That made him snap. He grabbed the nearest thing on the counter, a small porcelain vase Leonard had given me on our 10th anniversary, and threw it against the wall. It shattered into pieces, the sound sharp and final. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just looked at him. Get out, I said quietly. He stared at me, stunned. What? You heard me. Get out of my house. He took a step forward, as if trying to intimidate me. You don't mean that. I do, I said, my voice steady. Leave. For a long moment, he just stood there, breathing heavily. Then he turned, muttering something under his breath, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. When the sound finally faded, I sank into a chair, shaking but not from fear, from release. I had done it. I had stood my ground. Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't from heartbreak this time. They were from a strange, powerful sense of freedom. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself not out of selfishness, but out of survival. That night, the house was quiet again. Too quiet, maybe. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, looking out at the dark sky, wondering where my son had gone and what he might do next. A part of me hoped he would, but not like this. Not until he realized what he'd become. Still, something deep down told me the story wasn't over. Dylan was desperate. And desperate men didn't just walk away. I just didn't know how right I was. Because a week later, I got an unexpected letter. It was from Dylan's lawyer. He was trying to sue me for financial neglect. A week had passed since the day I told Dylan to leave my house. I thought maybe he'd gone quiet because he was finally reflecting on what had happened, maybe realizing how far he'd gone. The silence almost gave me hope. I spent those days reclaiming my peace, tending to my garden again, baking, even starting to sleep through the night without waking up to check the locks. But that illusion of calm shattered the moment I opened my mailbox. Among the usual bills and community newsletters was a thick envelope, sealed with an unfamiliar law firm's insignia. The return address was from the city Dylan lived in. My gut twisted. I didn't even have to open it to know what it was about. Still, my hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a neatly folded letter printed on official stationery. It read, Dear Mrs. Eleanor Carter. This correspondence serves as formal notice that Mr. Dylan Carter is seeking restitution under the claim of financial neglect and emotional damages related to your refusal to provide reasonable familial support during his period of financial distress. You are hereby requested to attend mediation or respond within 14 days to avoid escalation of this matter to court. Sincerely, Harrison and Cole Law Offices. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the words, my mind blank. Then, the absurdity hit me. My own son was suing me. I sank into the nearest chair, the letter shaking in my hands. Financial neglect? Emotional damages? I wanted to laugh and cry all at once. I had spent my life giving that boy everything: time, love, food, a home, an education. And now he was using the law to punish me for not giving him more. The tears came before I could stop them. Not loud, heaving sobs, just quiet, exhausted weeping, the kind that comes when your spirit finally cracks. Once I regained enough composure, I called Mr. Hayward. I could barely get the words out. Dylan's suing me, I whispered. He didn't sound shocked, only deeply disappointed. I was afraid this might happen. It's not uncommon when family entitlement turns into desperation. What do I do? Nothing yet, he said firmly. Let me handle it. We'll respond through the proper channels. But Eleanor, whatever happens, don't let him scare you into giving him money. That's exactly what this is meant to do. I hung up and just sat there for a long time, staring out the window. Outside, the world looked perfectly normal, children riding bikes down the street, neighbors mowing their lawns, birds chirping, but inside, my life felt like it had been turned upside down. When I told June later that day, she was furious. "He can't do that," she said, pacing my living room. "It's ridiculous. There's no law saying you have to bankroll your grown son." "I know," I said quietly. "But the fact that he's willing to go this far..." June stopped pacing and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Eleanor, you don't deserve this. You've been nothing but kind to that boy." I nodded slowly, but her words didn't comfort me. They only made me realize how far I'd fallen from the life I thought I had. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Dylan as a little boy, holding my hand on his first day of school, crying when he scraped his knee, whispering, "I love you, Mom," before bed. I had no idea how that boy had turned into the man who now saw me as an enemy to be defeated. The following morning, I met with Mr. Hayward in person. He reviewed the letter and smirked slightly. "It's all smoke and mirrors," he said. "There's no legal precedent for what he's claiming. We'll file a response denying everything. Don't worry, you're protected." Still, I couldn't help but ask, what if he really goes through with it? "Then we go to court," he said simply, "and you tell the truth." His confidence helped calm me. But as I drove home, a pit remained in my stomach. I wasn't afraid of losing the case, I was afraid of losing what little was left of my son. Over the next few days, news of the situation spread quietly among my small-town circle. People offered sympathy, some in whispers, others in shocked exclamations. I hated the attention. I didn't want pity, I wanted peace. I started writing in a journal every night, trying to process my emotions. At first, it was just scattered. Thoughts, anger, confusion, heartbreak, but as the days went on, I found strength in my own words. I wrote about boundaries, about motherhood, about love that had been tested to its limits. Writing helped me breathe again. I also joined a retirees support group that met every Thursday. I didn't tell them my full story right away, just that I was dealing with family conflict. But when one woman, a retired teacher, shared how her daughter had manipulated her for money, I finally spoke up. By the time I finished talking, several of them were crying. One woman reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're not alone," she said. "You did the right thing." That simple sentence stayed with me. It was the first time in weeks I didn't feel ashamed. 2 weeks later, another envelope arrived. This one was from the court. Dylan had officially filed the case. My mediation request had been rejected, he wanted a full hearing. I took the document to Mr. Hayward immediately. He looked through it and nodded grimly. "So be it, we'll prepare. This will get ugly, but I promise you, Eleanor, you'll come out stronger." As I left his office, I caught my reflection in the glass door. For the first time, I didn't see a frightened woman. I saw someone who was tired of being pushed around, someone who'd earned the right to stand up. Still, when the court date finally came in the mail, I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. The reality of it hit me like a tidal wave. My son, my only child, had dragged me into court. And that's where the moment everyone remembers happened. When Dylan stood up in court and pointed at me, calling me selfish, I felt decades of motherhood unravel. The day of the hearing came faster than I was ready for. The courthouse sat on the corner of Main Street, a modest building with gray stone steps that seemed to stretch endlessly before me. I stood at the bottom, clutching my handbag and trying to steady my breath. Mr. Hayward was beside me, calm and composed as ever. "Remember, Eleanor," he said softly. "We're not here to win an argument. We're here to tell the truth. Let the judge see your heart." I nodded, though my stomach twisted with nerves. The idea of sitting across from my son in a courtroom like strangers on opposite sides was something I could never have imagined. When I walked into the courtroom, I saw him immediately. Dylan was sitting at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a dark suit that didn't quite fit him. He didn't look at me. His lawyer, a young man with slicked back hair, whispered something to him, and Dylan nodded stiffly. I sat down across from him, my hands clasped together to stop them from trembling. I didn't recognize the man before me anymore. He was my son, yes, but the warmth, the spark I once saw in his eyes, was gone. All that was left was bitterness. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a calm presence, entered and called the court to order. The sound of her gavel echoed like thunder in my chest. "Mr. Carter," the judge began, "you are claiming financial neglect and emotional damages against your mother. Please proceed with your opening statement." Dylan's lawyer stood and began to speak in smooth, practiced tones. He painted a picture of Dylan as a man struggling under immense pressure, betrayed by a wealthy, indifferent parent. He spoke of familial obligation, of moral duty, and even used phrases like willful negligence. Each word felt like a knife. When it was Dylan's turn to speak, he rose slowly. I could see the strain in his face, the anger, the resentment, and maybe, beneath it all, the shame he refused to show. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady but cold. "I'm not here to attack my mother. I'm here because I've exhausted every other option. My mother has refused to support me. Financially, despite having more than enough. I've begged for help. I've tried to reason with her. But she's chosen to turn her back on me, her only child." He paused dramatically, glancing toward me as if expecting me to crumble under the weight of his words. I stayed silent. "She's sitting on a pension that she doesn't even use," he continued, "while I'm struggling to stay afloat. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for fairness, for compassion, for what any good mother would do." The judge nodded curtly. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. Mrs. Carter, your response?" Mr. Hayward stood up beside me. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "this case is built on emotional manipulation, not law. There is no legal obligation for a retired mother to surrender her pension to her adult son. What my client has endured is not neglect, it is abuse. Psychological, emotional, and financial abuse." Then he motioned to me. "Mrs. Carter would like to make a personal statement." My knees felt weak as I stood. The room seemed to close in around me, the fluorescent lights too bright, the air too thin. I looked at Dylan, really looked at him. And for a moment, I saw the little boy he once was, sitting in the kitchen, coloring pictures while I made dinner. The memory almost broke me. But then I remembered the nights of fear, the manipulation, the humiliation, so I spoke. "Your Honor," I began softly, "I love my son. I always have. But love doesn't mean obedience. Love doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity for someone who's willing to hurt you." Dylan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but I continued. "I worked as a nurse for nearly 40 years. I saved every dollar I could, not for luxury, but for survival. My pension isn't excess, it's security. It's the roof over my head, the medicine I might one day need, the independence I fought for after losing my husband." I took a deep breath, my voice steadying. "My son came to me, asking for money, not because he was hungry or homeless, but because he made reckless choices. He took loans from dangerous people. He lied to me. He went through my private papers. He even tried to publicly shame me when I said no." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Dylan's lawyer shifted nervously. "I didn't want this," I continued. "I didn't want a courtroom or lawyers or witnesses. I just wanted my son to remember that love is not a transaction. That a mother's worth isn't measured by the size of her bank account." I turned then, looking directly at Dylan. "I will always love you, Dylan. But I will not let you destroy me to save yourself." The silence that followed was heavy, unbroken. Even the judge seemed to pause longer than usual before speaking. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter," she said finally, her tone measured but kind. "Please be seated." As I sat down, Dylan shot to his feet. "You're unbelievable," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "You're standing there pretending to be some saint when all I ever wanted was your help. You made me this way, you and Dad, you never believed in me." The judge banged her gavel sharply. "Mr. Carter, that's enough." But he kept going, his voice shaking. "You think this makes you look strong? Everyone's pitying you right now. But you're just... enough," the judge said again, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The bailiff stepped forward, and Dylan finally fell silent, his chest heaving. I didn't say a word. I just watched him, my heart breaking and hardening all at once. When the judge finally spoke again, her voice was calm, deliberate. "This court sees no legal grounds for Mr. Carter's claim. The case is dismissed." The sound of the gavel hitting the bench echoed through the room, final and unyielding. When I finished, the room was so silent, you could hear a pin drop. When I sat down, people weren't looking at him anymore, they were looking at me. The courtroom remained frozen in silence after the judge's gavel came down. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. The air was thick with disbelief, shock that a son would drag his mother through something so cruel, and awe that I had finally stood my ground. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room on me, but for once, I didn't shrink under their weight. I felt steady. Dylan stood motionless beside his lawyer, his face pale and rigid. He looked like he wanted to speak again but couldn't find the words. The fury that had fueled him all this time seemed to drain out of him, leaving only emptiness. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, but Dylan didn't respond. He just stared down at the floor. When the judge rose and exited the room, everyone else began to move. Papers shuffled, chairs scraped, whispers filled the air. I caught snippets of them, words like brave, unbelievable, heartbreaking. I didn't feel brave, though. I felt tired. The kind of tired that sits in your bones. Born from years of love that's been stretched too thin. Mr. Hayward placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You did beautifully, Eleanor," he said. "You spoke from the heart. That's what won today." I nodded, my throat tight. "I didn't want to win," I murmured. "I just wanted him to stop." He gave me a sympathetic look. Sometimes stopping someone means standing firm. "You did what you had to do." As we gathered our things, I glanced one last time at Dylan. He finally looked up at me, his expression unreadable. There was anger there, yes, but also confusion, maybe even shame. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw my son again, the boy who used to run into my arms after school, who used to beg me to read one more bedtime story. But then he turned away. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was buzzing with quiet murmurs. A few people approached me, strangers who had watched the case unfold. One woman, maybe in her 50s, gently touched my arm. "You're incredibly strong," she said softly. "My brother did something similar to our parents. I wish my mother had been as brave as you." Her words made my eyes sting. "Thank you," I whispered. I didn't feel strong, but I guess sometimes strength just means surviving. When I stepped outside, the sun hit my face, warm and bright. I hadn't realized how dark it felt inside until that moment. "Mr. Hayward walked me to my car. "This isn't the end of your story, Eleanor," he said. "It's the beginning of your freedom." As I drove home, I thought about that word freedom. For weeks, I had lived under the weight of guilt and fear. Every phone call, every knock at the door had felt like a threat. But now, for the first time, I could breathe. I didn't owe anyone anything. Still, the victory felt hollow. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. For years, that chair had been Dylan's whenever he came home to visit. I could almost see him there again, laughing, talking, teasing me about overcooking the roast. But those memories felt like they belonged to another lifetime. I poured myself a glass of wine and whispered into the stillness, "Where did we go wrong, Dylan?" There was no answer, only the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old wall clock. The next morning, I woke up early, unable to shake the heaviness in my chest. I decided to go for a walk. The air was crisp, the smell of wet grass still lingering from last night's rain. As I walked through town, people who recognized me from the courthouse nodded politely, some even stopping to offer quiet words of support. It was strange, being seen as strong when I felt anything but. I wasn't a hero. I was just a mother who had been pushed too far. Later that week, I got a call from Laura, the girlfriend who'd been with Dylan at that disastrous lunch. Voice was hesitant but sincere. "Mrs. Carter," she said. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't know he was going to take things this far. I tried to talk him out of it." "Don't apologize, dear," I said softly. "You can't control what he does. None of us can." She hesitated before speaking again. "He's not doing well. He hasn't been himself since the hearing. I think he finally realizes what he's done." That made my heart ache. "I hope so," I said. "Because until he does, there's nothing I can do for him." When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. For the first time since this all began, I felt the faint stirrings of peace, not because everything was fixed, but because I knew I had done everything I could. I thought about what the judge had said before adjourning the case. "This court commends Mrs. Carter for her courage and composure in standing against undue pressure from family. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are protection." Those words replayed in my mind like a mantra. Boundaries are not cruelty, they're love that refuses to be trampled. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stepped into my garden, the air cool and still. The lavender was blooming again, the same flowers I'd planted the year Leonard died. Their scent filled the air, soft and soothing. I closed my eyes and let the peace wash over me. Inside, the phone sat silent. No angry calls, no threats, just quiet. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Dylan might have lost the case, but something told me he hadn't lost the lesson yet, and part of me, against all logic, still hoped he would learn it. Because love doesn't vanish, even after everything. It just changes shape. But something unexpected happened the very next day. He came back, but not with demands, this time with tears. It happened the very next morning. I was in the garden, trimming the rose bushes, when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My first instinct was dread. My heart began to race as I wiped my hands on my apron and turned toward the noise. When I saw Dylan's old car parked there, I froze. The same car that had carried him away in anger just weeks earlier was now back in front of my home. He stepped out slowly, looking nothing like the man who had stood in court shouting at me. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes, those once sharp, cold eyes, were red and tired. He looked smaller somehow, like he'd been carrying a burden too heavy for too long. For a moment, neither of us said a word. We just stood there, the morning breeze rustling the trees between us. "Hi, Mom," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, my mind torn between caution and the ache that had never really left. "Hi, Dylan." He looked down, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, remembering every cruel word, every sleepless night, every tear I'd cried over what he'd done. But something in his posture, his slumped shoulders, the guilt in his eyes made me step aside. "All right," I said softly. "Come in." Inside, he didn't sit right away. He just stood in the middle of the living room, glancing around like it was the first time he'd really seen it. The photos on the mantel, the little knickknacks Leonard and I had collected over the years, everything was the same. Yet everything had changed. "You kept all this," he murmured. "Of course I did," I said quietly. "It's my home." He nodded, and then the words came tumbling out. "I'm sorry, Mom." His voice broke on the last word. "I was wrong. About everything." I didn't respond. I just watched him as he sank into the couch, his face buried in his hands. "You didn't deserve any of it," he said. "The yelling, the lawsuit, the way I treated you. I don't even know who I was anymore." Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them away. "Why now, Dylan? Why come back?" He exhaled shakily. "Because I hit bottom. After the court thing, everyone found out. My friends stopped talking to me. Laura left. My name's ruined in my field. And for the first time, I had to sit with myself and realize that maybe I wasn't the victim I thought I was." His words came haltingly, but there was honesty in them. Painful, raw honesty. "I was angry at you for not saving me," he continued. "But I see now that you already did. My whole life you kept bailing me out. Every time I failed, you picked me up. Every time I made a bad choice, you made it go away. You taught me that no matter what I did, you'd fix it, and when you finally didn't, I fell apart. I didn't know how to stand on my own. I sat down across from him, silent, letting his words settle. I'm ashamed, he said, his voice cracking. I hurt you. I humiliated you. And for what? Money that wouldn't have fixed anything. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock. Finally, I said gently, Dylan, I never wanted to see you fall. I just couldn't watch you destroy both of us. I needed to let you learn the hard way, even if it broke my heart. He nodded slowly, tears spilling freely now. I get it, I do. And I don't expect you to forgive me, I just needed to tell you I'm sorry. I reached across the coffee table and placed my hand over his. His skin was cold, trembling. I forgive you, I whispered. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means I want you to heal, both of us. He looked up at me then, eyes full of regret and something else. Peace. I'm getting help, he said after a pause. Therapy, debt counseling. I've been working part-time at a construction company. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. I wanted to start over. For real this time. I felt something inside me, ease, like a tight knot loosening for the first time in months. That's all I ever wanted for you, I said softly. To be honest with yourself, with me. We talked for hours that day, really talked, maybe for the first time since he was a teenager. He told me about the mistakes that snowballed, the loans he couldn't pay, the people he'd disappointed. And for once, he didn't try to justify it, he just owned it. When he finally stood to leave, the sun was dipping low, casting a golden light through the windows. He turned to me, eyes wet again. Thank you for letting me in, he said. I didn't deserve it. Everyone deserves a chance to make things right, I said. Just make sure this time, you do it for you, not for me. He nodded, and before walking out, he pulled me into a hug. It wasn't the quick, forced kind he'd given me when he first came back. It was real, trembling, and full of sorrow and relief all at once. When the door closed behind him, I stood there in the quiet, my heart both heavy and light. He wasn't healed, not yet, but he was trying. And maybe, for the first time, he understood what love really meant, and that honesty would lead to something even bigger. Once the dust settled, I realized I'd gained something far more valuable than money. The weeks after Dylan's visit felt different, quiet, but not the hollow kind of quiet I'd grown used to. This was peaceful. Healing. The house still echoed with memories, yes, but they didn't sting as much anymore. Every morning, I'd open the curtains and let the sunlight in, breathing in the scent of my lavender garden and feeling lighter. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't living in fear of a knock on the door or an unexpected phone call. I'd stopped checking my bank account daily, stopped replaying old conversations in my head. Instead, I started to focus on the one thing I'd neglected for years myself. I began volunteering again, at the local community center, where I'd once helped with health classes for retirees. When people learned about what I'd gone through, they were shocked, but then, they started opening up. Turns out, my story wasn't as rare as I thought. There were other parents, other grandparents, who'd been taken advantage of by their own children, their relatives, their so-called loved ones. They carried shame quietly, believing it made them bad parents. So I started sharing. Not every detail, but enough. Enough for them to know they weren't alone. I remember one afternoon vividly, an older gentleman, probably in his 70s, told me through tears how his daughter had drained his savings for investments that never existed. He said he'd felt weak for not seeing it coming. I reached across the table, took his hand, and said, "Love makes us vulnerable. But setting boundaries doesn't mean you stop loving them, it means you start loving yourself too." After that, I began leading small workshops about financial awareness for retirees. We met every Wednesday in the community center's small library. I'd print out handouts with advice from my lawyer, talk about warning signs of manipulation, and when I felt brave enough, share my own mistakes. The first week, 5 people showed up. By the third, there were nearly 30. It became more than just a class, it became a safe space. A place where people could talk about the kind of pain no one wants to admit, the pain of being betrayed by your own blood. Every time someone thanked me afterward, I'd smile and tell them, "You're the one doing the hard part, choosing to take your power back." And every time I said it, I realized I was speaking to myself, too. Meanwhile, Dylan and I began communicating again, but this time, on my terms. Short phone calls, honest conversations, no guilt, no manipulation. He kept his promise about therapy and even shared pieces of what he was learning. "My counselor says I used money as a way to feel control," he told me once. But all it ever did was make me lose the people who actually cared about me. It wasn't easy to hear, but I was proud of him for admitting it. Slowly, cautiously, trust began to sprout again. Fragile, but real. One afternoon, he called to tell me he'd found steady work at a local hardware store. "It's not much, Mom," he said, "but I'm earning my own way now." "That's everything," I replied. "That's how you start rebuilding." And in truth, I was rebuilding too. Not just my relationship with him, but my life, my confidence, my peace. I started traveling again, little trips at first. A weekend at the coast, a few days in Vermont to see the autumn colors I'd once dreamed about. I'd sit by myself in small cafes, sipping tea and journaling, grateful for the quiet that used to feel like loneliness but now felt like freedom. Every now and then, I'd meet other travelers, retired teachers, widows, solo adventurers, and when conversations turned to family, I'd tell my story. Not as a tale of heartbreak anymore, but as one of strength. Back home, my garden flourished. I planted new flowers, rearranged the furniture, repainted the walls. I wanted the house to reflect who I was becoming, stronger, calmer, and unafraid to take up space. I even put up a framed quote by the front door. One I'd found in a bookstore on one of my trips. "You cannot heal in the same place you were broken, but you can bloom in its light." Then one afternoon, I hosted a small tea party for the women from my support group. We sat outside in the garden, laughing and sharing stories. One woman raised her cup and said, "To Eleanor for proving it's never too late to start over." Everyone clinked cups, and I smiled, tears pricking my eyes. I wasn't used to being the strong one, the example. But maybe that was the gift hidden in all this pain. I'd learned that strength isn't about being fearless. It's about standing up after the world knocks you down, again and again. Later that evening, after everyone left, I sat alone on the porch, watching the fireflies flicker over the grass. My life wasn't perfect. My son and I still had miles to go before full forgiveness. But it was honest now. And that honesty was worth more than any pension, any bank account, any false peace. I leaned back in my chair, smiling softly to myself. I had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and humiliation, and still found a way to turn it into something meaningful. The loneliness I once feared had become something else entirely. Solitude. The kind that heals. And for the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And then one morning, he surprised me again. He handed me a small envelope and said, "Mom, this is for you." It was a crisp autumn morning, one of those perfect days when the air feels clean and the sky is a soft watercolor blue. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee and flipping through my gardening magazine when I heard the familiar sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway. My heart skipped. I looked out the window, and there he was, Dylan, stepping out of his car, holding something in his hand. This time, I didn't feel fear or hesitation. I simply smiled. He looked different, healthier. His hair was neatly trimmed, his clothes simple but clean. There was a steadiness in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. He waved awkwardly before making his way up the steps. "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice soft. "Good morning, sweetheart," I replied, opening the door. "You're up early. Everything all right?" He nodded. "Yeah, actually, I came to give you something." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white envelope, holding it out with both hands. "This is for you." I frowned in confusion, taking it slowly. "What's this?" "Open it," he said. Inside was a check. My eyes widened when I saw the number. It was the exact amount he had once demanded from me. Half my pension. The same sum that had nearly torn us apart. "Dylan," I whispered, my voice shaking. "What is this?" He swallowed hard. "It's everything I took from you, everything I tried to take. I don't expect you to cash it. I just needed to give it back, to make it right." I stared at the check, unable to speak. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. He looked at me, his face filled with quiet remorse. "I got promoted last month," he said. "My boss knows what I went through. He gave me a chance when no one else would. I've been saving every extra dollar since then. I thought about what you said, that love isn't about taking, it's about respect. So I wanted to show you that I finally get it." I blinked through the tears. "Oh, Dylan." He shook his head. "You don't have to take it, Mom. I just needed you to know that I'm not that same person anymore." I placed the check gently on the table and took his hand. "You don't owe me a thing," I said softly. "You already paid me back with change." He frowned slightly, confused. "What do you mean?" I smiled through my tears. "You gave me back my peace, my faith, and you found your integrity again. That's worth more than any amount of money." He nodded slowly, his own eyes glassy. "I couldn't have done it without you standing your ground. I hated you for it at first, but now I understand why you did it." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us letting the past settle. The anger, the shame, the pain, they all seemed smaller now, like distant echoes instead of open wounds. "I've been going to therapy every week," he said. "Still paying off the debts, but I'm doing it on my own. No shortcuts this time." I felt a deep pride swell in my chest. "That's all I ever wanted, Dylan. For you to find your own footing." He smiled faintly. "And I finally have. I even started helping out at a financial literacy workshop. Kind of ironic, huh?" I laughed softly, shaking my head. "I suppose the student became the teacher." He grinned. "Guess I got it from you." We spent the rest of the morning sitting at the table, talking like we used to about small things, simple things. His new job, my garden, the apple pie I'd been planning to bake for the church fundraiser. For once, there were no heavy words between us, no tension in the air, just ease. Before he left, he stood at the door and turned to me. "Mom," he said quietly, "thank you for not giving up on me even when I didn't deserve it." I smiled. "That's what mothers do. But I also learned that loving you doesn't mean losing myself." We both had to learn that lesson. He nodded, and for the first time in years, I saw peace in his eyes. Real peace. When his car disappeared down the road, I sat on the porch with the check still in my hand. The morning sun warmed my face as I looked at it one last time before folding it carefully and tucking it into my keepsake box, not for the money, but as a reminder, a symbol of how far we'd both come. As the wind rustled through the trees, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the heartbreak, the anger, the courtroom, the tears, and how every painful step had led to this moment. I looked around my home, my sanctuary, and realized something profound. This wasn't just my victory. It was ours. We had both grown up, both learned what love really looked like. I stood, took a deep breath, and smiled to myself. My pension was still mine. My home was still my refuge. But my dignity, that was the true treasure I'd reclaimed. And as I gazed at the horizon, watching the morning light spill across my garden, I felt something I hadn't felt in years complete. Because when I stood up that day, I didn't just defend my pension, I reclaimed my power.